am I just cleaning my stuff instead of minimizing it? Am I organizing instead of decluttering? And I think quite often organizing is the problem, not the solution.
You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Malabama. Hello, everybody. New year, new intro. What do you think of that, TK Coleman?
Man, Bama's voice, what a way to kick it off.
Oh, y'all are sweet. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. The most lovely voice in the land. By the way, Ryan Nicodemus will be joining us via phone in a bit. But first, coming up today on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about the best place to start letting go. And another listener has a question about why it's so difficult to get rid of all the things that she has spent all of her hard-earned money on. Then we've got our lightning round segment, a FAMS question, and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 424, where we answer 5 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments, including a beautiful home tour this week. That private podcast episode is out right now. Patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free because advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Kristen.
Hi, my name is Kristen, and I'm calling from Cleveland, Ohio. My husband and I recently watched the series on Netflix featuring minimalism. And during the series, you talked about 2 ways to get started. So one was getting rid of 1 item a day, 2 on day 2, 3 on day 3, etc. And the second was pack everything up, only take out what's needed, and kind of get rid of the rest in a simple term. Both are great. We were torn on which one to do. I like 2 the best, but with kids, we can't realistically do that. My husband liked 1. And so the first one where you get rid of an item each day and it builds progressively. But our thought was, what about a calendar? So day 1, right, we clean out the linen closet and get rid of the linen closet because we can't necessarily pack everything up, and then we go through those things. Day 2, maybe it's the cabinets in the laundry room. Day 3, maybe it's the pantry, whatever it may be, and follow that instead. And our question is, are we doing more cleaning than actually following the minimalism program, or are we having the same principles just done a different way? So we wanted to make sure we're following the program, understanding the purpose, but kind of meshing both together in some sort of, calendar form, but really packing up and cleaning, 1 area instead of 1 item at a time, or potentially 2 or 3. So hopefully, we can get an answer on that, and we can get started as we're very excited. Thanks.
TK, I think the essence of this question, and I hear it a lot, is letting go or decluttering or minimizing or organizing is so overwhelming because I'm so overwhelmed by all of these things. I don't even know where to start. So we put it off. I'll do it one day. I will do it someday. The first day of the year, and by the way, this episode comes out on New Year's Day, but the first day of every year, I tweet the same thing, or I post the same thing on X, I guess. Now, it is one day or day 1. You decide. And that's really where Kristen is right now. She's trying to decide, okay, how do I get started? I want today to be day 1, but I don't even know where to start. You've presented a few things with your Netflix documentary, and I don't know which one's appropriate for me. Or is there a hybrid that's appropriate for me? And so practically, I can tell you that, yes, there is a 30-day minimalism game. That is really designed for people who don't know where to start. By the way, you can download the free calendar over at theminimalists.com/game. You can see exactly how to play the 30-day minimalism game over there. It's essentially partnering up with someone and slowly getting rid of some things. And then by the end of the month, you've gotten all this momentum. You've strengthened that letting go muscle. Then there are some people who are more extreme, like Ryan Nicodemus, who decided to do his packing party, which was documented in our Netflix film, Less Is Now. And he decided to pack up everything as if he were moving and then unpack only the items he needed over 21 days. And at the end of it, 80% of his stuff still in boxes. He realized, hey, I'm probably not going to get value from most of these things. Is there a hybrid? Sure there is. Our last book, Love People Use Things, we did a 50-person case study. 50 people from our audience participated in their version of a packing party. And we gave them 3 options. You could do the whole house packing party. Let's get so extreme. Pack up everything, pretend you're moving, only unpack the stuff that you need. For some people, they're like, hey, I can't do that. I've got a family. I don't have the time for that right now. It'd be too chaotic. But you know what? I think I could do it in one room. That's option 2. If you just want to start with the basement, you start with the attic, you start with the closet. Starting somewhere, your bathroom, your kitchen, to get you that momentum you need. Do a whole house packing party for 21 days or do a 1-room packing party. Or we had quite a few people do 2 or 3 rooms, a multi-room packing party. Can't do my whole house right now, but I'm really struggling with my basement. And my guest bathroom just has too many things in it. Or my guest bedroom is really now just a storage locker for my excess stuff. Let me deal with that first. And so one day or day one, you decide, well, Kristen's already decided today is the day I want to get started. I want to start letting go. And if a packing party is too extreme for you, I think the 30-day minimalism game is a great way to get started. You can download that calendar for free. But she brings up, I think, a more important point. Am I just cleaning my stuff instead of minimizing it? Am I organizing instead of decluttering? And I think quite often organizing is the problem, not the solution. And that's why people turn to minimalism. They turn to simplifying. They turn to letting go of the things as opposed to organizing the things. Yes, I want to have an organized home, but the easiest way to organize my home is to get rid of the excess stuff. And that's what something like a packing party or the 30-day minimalism game allows us to do.
Yeah, one of the things you're really big on is that prescriptions are easy. If you've made up your mind to change, you can always find a prescription or a technique that will allow you to implement change. But you got to get the mindset first. I'm curious from your perspective, what is it at the mindset level that makes it so difficult for us to get started? So like in this instance, she knows that today is day one. She knows that she wants to change. You don't think the problem is the lack of a technique. What do you think the challenge is?
That's a great point. Because if I give you the 432 ways to declutter your closet, that's also going to be overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
I think ultimately the problem is that we are so overwhelmed that we don't know where to start. And then we start looking at the most difficult areas.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got all these sentimental things from one of my parents who died. Should I get rid of I'm not even asking that question right now. The question I'm asking is, what's going to allow me to let go today? And quite often, those are the things I know I don't like. Go to the back of your closet. How many things have you not worn in the last year? Don't even worry about the last season, but in the last year. It's a brand new year now. What did you not wear in 2023? Well, there's a good chance you're probably not going to wear that in 2024 or 2025 and beyond. In fact, there might be a lot of things in there that you don't just feel about, you actively dislike. I hate that old sweater. I hate the way it looks on me. Those jeans, oh man, they're uncomfortable, or they look weird, or they ride up when I sit down.
Yeah.
This is what happens because I don't know where to get started, so I just don't get started. Starting with the easy things is much simpler than starting with the things that we're attached to, tethered to. We can get to those later. Once we've practiced letting go a bit, it becomes easier. You've built those muscles up. But right now, if you're overwhelmed, what are the things that you know you want to get rid of?
One other thing at the level of mindset that can really get in the way of decluttering is the ideas we inherit about what it really means to do a thing. So, for instance, you're not really working unless you're sweating. You're not really being productive unless you're busy all the time. You're not really in touch with your emotions unless you're behaving dramatically. You're not really concerned unless you're crying. And we have all of these sorts of ideas about what it really means to feel something, what it really means to do something. And the way that can look with decluttering is this belief that says you're not really minimizing unless you're minimizing a lot of stuff. And one of the things that we have to give ourselves permission to do is to be minimalist in our approach to progress, to give ourselves permission to start small. I was today years old when I learned that in the high Middle Ages, one of the little revolutions that changed the way in which mathematics was done was they shifted from a Roman numeral system to an Arabic system. The main difference was that in the Arabic system, they made use of a concept called zero. Prior to that, they didn't make much use of zero, and subtraction was very difficult. But once you brought in that concept of zero, it made so many other things easier. And so much of life is like that, right? Things feel complicated, they feel difficult because we're not working with all the tools. And then someone comes along and they introduce a little concept like zero, and things which were once very difficult become a little simpler. And we can do this when it comes to minimalizing our things. Give yourself permission to start as small as you possibly can and invoke that concept of non-zero days. Any change you can make so that you're minimizing and it's not zero, that's enough. And if you can just say yes to that, you'll eventually get exactly where you need to be.
That concept of the minimalism game actually came out of our second book, Everything That Remains, but it wasn't the minimalism game at the time. It's how I started simplifying my own life. And I asked myself a question. What would happen if you got rid of one material possession each day for a month? Just one item. I'm just focused on one thing today. You say one day at a time. For me, it was one thing, one day at a time. But guess what? At the end of 30 days, I got rid of way more than 30 items. And over the course of 8 months, I got rid of about 90% of my material possessions. But then Ryan saw me do it, and he was like, oh, that's great for you, but I'm not going to spend 8 months. I want to get aggressive. I want to do it now. And that's where the packing party was birthed. Because if you really feel like just diving headfirst into the deep end, that is an option for you. You can dive in and do a multi-room packing party, or you can get started today with something as simple as the 30-day minimalism game. Download that free calendar, theminimalists.com/game. And Kristen, let us know about your progress. There are tens of thousands of people who have played this game. You can post your pictures online using our Less Is Now hashtag. Check that out wherever you post photos on social media. Our next question is from Carmelita.
Good morning. My name is Carmelita, calling from Livonia, Michigan. I'm calling because I retired in 2020. I used to be a shopaholic. I have a lot of brand new things that's still in its original container, and I struggle with getting rid of it, but I want to. And my question is, how do you get rid of things that's brand new that you worked hard and spent money for? Hope to hear from you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
TK, where do you want to start with this one?
How do I get rid of things that are brand new that you've worked really hard to spend money on?
See, when you ask the question that way, I hear one framing of it, but I also hear a separate framing of, how do I get rid of things that I'm having trouble getting rid of, although I still want to get rid of them? And I think that's the dilemma that a lot of people are in. I want to get rid of it, but simultaneously, I don't want to get rid of it.
What's the part of you that wants to get rid of it? What's the part of you that doesn't want to get rid of it? And once you make those two things explicit, as the old question goes, which wolf do you want to feed? Sometimes we know the answers, but we really need to draw out and make explicit the assumptions that are at play, because we have all these conflicting parts. I want to go to that, but I don't want to go to that. I want to say yes, but I also want to say no. Okay, that's totally fine. As human beings, we're complex. We're multidimensional. We want conflicting things. And economizing is dealing with the scarcity of not being able to be everywhere at one time, not being able to do everything at one time. And so we have to figure out how we're going to prioritize. So what is that part of me that says, I want to let this go? Well, that's the part of me that wants to feel free. That's the part of me that wants to feel light. That's the part of me that wants to be available to the people that I love, the projects that fire me up, and so on. Well, what's the part of me that wants to hang on? That's the part of me that's telling myself that I'm a wasteful person if I let it go. That's the part of me that is afraid of having to explain to someone in my family that says, hey man, I think that's irresponsible for you to let that go. It turns out that's not the me that I really want to be. However, I'm scared of the implications and the cost and the challenges that come along with the person that I do want to be. And so that leads us to the next question, which is, am I willing to pay the price of being the person that I know my heart compels me to become?
I think there's also something about the sunk cost fallacy here, and maybe you could shine a light on that for us, because that's exactly what she's saying. I spent my hard-earned money. It'd be so much easier to get rid of these things if someone else just gave them to me. I didn't spend any of my resources, my time, my attention. By the way, you didn't just spend your money. You had to go to the store and look for these things, and there was a lot of attention paid, and maybe you were being super intentional at the time about the things you thought would add value to your life. And for me, letting go of a thing also involves letting go of the false story that I'm telling myself about that thing.
Yeah.
One of those stories is, oh, it's worth a lot to me because I spent a lot of money on it in the past.
That's right. So the sunk cost fallacy is really tricky because it basically says, I've already spent time, energy, or money on a particular thing. I realize after the fact that I no longer want this particular thing. However, it would be wasteful of me if I didn't just take advantage of it, if I didn't just use it or consume it because I've already made my investment. But here's the thing. The time, energy, and money that you spent on that particular thing has already been spent. If you choose to consume it or engage it further, you are now going to be making an additional investment of time, energy, and money. And so the question is it wise of me to make an additional investment of my valuable time, energy, and money just because in the past I made a bad investment? One way to think about the shortcoming of this kind of thinking is with respect to food. Let's say you spent a certain amount of money on a meal at a restaurant, and maybe because you were really hungry at the time that you ordered more food than you could consume. And so the food's there and you eat it and you're really full, you're starting to feel bloated, but you think, well, I already spent the money on this food, so I gotta make myself eat it because I don't want to be wasteful. But here's the thing, you're still being wasteful. You're just using your body as the trash can instead of the garbage can, right? But there are other things that you might be able to do with that resource. You might be able to give it to someone else, or you may not be able to recover the cost at all. It may be the type of thing where it's like, nobody's gonna eat that. You don't want to use it as leftovers, but sometimes it's best to accept the loss than to create further future losses merely because we regret a decision that we made after changing our mind. And so sometimes in life, we have to learn by doing. Decision making is a process of discovery. None of us are working with a perfect knowledge of the world. And part of life is making mistakes, refining our decisions, saying, I'm not happy with that result, and then improving over time. But the last thing that you want to do is lock yourself into this pattern of saying, I'm going to do things that don't reflect my values, that don't bring me joy for no other reason than that in the past, I already spent some money on something that didn't bring me joy. You know?
I made a decision that is now inconsistent with my current desires or beliefs or whatever it might be. I love the analogy you're using here with going to a restaurant, ordering too much food. I'd like to extend that analogy even further and say, okay, you can put it in a box for me and I take it home and then I set it in my fridge. And how long are you going to leave it in your fridge until you finally get rid of it? But I spent a ton of money on it. You know, that steak was $100 steak. I really went all out on this. And now half of that steak is still in my fridge, and I know I'm not getting any value from it, but I spent so much money on it, and it's decaying. It is expired. Well, maybe these things that you're holding on to are also expired for you. And it is true that you spent a lot of money on these things, and maybe you can recoup some of it. I have a great process for letting go of any of my material possessions. If something is worth more than $20, I try to sell it. If I can't sell it in 7 days, I lower the price. If I can't sell it in 30 days, then I will attempt to donate it. If I can't donate it, I'll attempt to recycle it. And ultimately, if I can't recycle it, then I will trash it. That does a few things. One is it gives me a process to work through, a mechanical process to get rid of something, so I'm not holding on for too long. But it also makes sure that I'm being responsible with the letting go that I am doing. That threshold for me now is, instead of $20, is $100, because when I was in debt, I was like, any dollar amount that I can get, that was really helpful.
Yeah.
But now it's like, okay, if something costs more than $100, or I can get more than $100 for it, it's probably worth my time to put it up on eBay or Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or any of these places. However, if I can only get $3 for it, is it worth that time and anguish of trying to get rid of the thing? No, I'd rather just donate it, or I'd rather just recycle it if I can't donate it. And ultimately, that means I'm producing way less waste because I'm finding things a new home, whether it's me selling it or it's me giving it to someone who needs it or will get more value from it than me, or finding a place like a Goodwill, a donation center, donation warehouse that will take these things and allowing them to find it a new home. Now I'm not clinging. And in a weird way, what I've realized is that by refusing to cling to the thing, someone else will actually get value from it. And Carmelita is getting negative value from these things now because not only are they taking up space in her home, but they're taking up space in her mind.
That's right. You know, one of my fundamental convictions about economics is that it isn't just about money. It's about human action. It's about prioritizing our human resources, time, money, attention, all of these things. And when it comes to the sunk cost fallacy, these things apply to every aspect of life, not just budgeting decisions that we make, you know? So whether you buy a movie ticket and force yourself to sit through a film for 2 hours when you hate it and realize you hated it after the first 10 minutes, or you buy a 300-page book and you realize, hey, I made a bad decision or I don't like this book, but you force yourself to read it anyway. The illusion that you have to overcome is that you are saving resources by forcing yourself to persist in something just because you invested in it. That is not what's happening. There is no such thing as a free lunch, right? There's no decision you can possibly make that doesn't cost you anything, because there is always an opportunity cost for everything you choose to do. So when you force yourself to finish that movie, finish that meal, finish that book, stay in that relationship that's toxic because, well, I've been in it for 5 years and I've invested a lot of time and energy, you are getting ready to cost yourself all of the other opportunities you would be available to for how you could use that time, that energy, that money, and so on. And so that stuff, you don't want that stuff, but you're telling yourself a story that I'm saving because I spent money on it and I get to hold on to the money in the form of these things that I want to get rid of. But what is holding on? Keeping you from being available to. If you let that stuff go, you stop paying that cost. And that's where your freedom is.
Carmelita, I'd love to help you practically and mechanically through some of this process of letting go. I know how overwhelming it can be. And since today is January 1st, the day this episode comes out, it is the relaunch of our course, which is called Simplify Everything. It's the first ever decluttering course that we've ever done as the Minimalists. We're 13 plus years into this thing. And we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years putting together this course. It is 5 weeks, although you can take it at whatever pace you'd like. I've had some people say it took it over 16 weeks. Some people take it over just the regular 5 weeks. And we help you declutter everything in your life. It starts with the physical clutter. In fact, that's the first week. And then we move on to things like digital clutter or your calendar clutter. You know, getting rid of some of that busyness that might be going on in life. Financial clutter, the money problems that we all tend to run into, especially related to our material clutter. Our material clutter gets us into these money clutter problems. And so we help you deal with the financial clutter. And then the last week is the relationship clutter portion of that, identifying how we can create distance and space, sometimes love people from a distance, or bring people closer to us and be more loving once we've gotten rid of the relationship clutter in our lives. It's 5 weeks, it's 17 video lessons, 45 clutter problem areas, 135 decluttering solutions, a 30-page workbook, and student forums. Because people all take it together, they get to participate and learn and let go together. Head on over to simplifyeverything.xyz, and you can read some of our student testimonials. You can check out the brand new trailer that we put together for the course as well, and you can just get all the details. Simplifyeverything.xyz. Carmelita, I'm going to let you sign up for that at no cost so that you can enjoy letting go with this new group of students. Welcome back, y'all. Alabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round where we answer your questions from TikTok.
Yes, indeed. You can follow The Minimalists on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, and Threads. We are at The Minimalists on all of those platforms. Now, during the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, less than 140-character response. We call them minimal maxims, and we put those minimal maxims in the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast, so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you'd like. Joining us on the phone right now to help us tackle this TikTok question is my best friend, Ryan Nicodemus.
Yay!
What's up?
Hi, Ryan.
Oh, it's so good to be with y'all. How's it going?
Welcome back, Nicodemus. I'm so glad to have you here for this question in particular because you're the hope guy. And, this question is about feeling hopeless.
You know, if anyone else called me the hope guy, I would not take that as an insult. But for some reason, dude, I feel like it's a passive-aggressive thing, man.
A compusult, one might say.
A compusult. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we're going to talk about hopefulness here, and I'll tell you why it is actually a compliment here in a moment. But let's get to Finney's question.
I feel hopeless when I look at the state of our society, government, economy, and broken institutions. How can I live my life without feeling constantly disappointed by the world around me?
Now, Ryan, you know that when I talk about hope, I think there are kind of two types of hope here. One is expectation. Oh, I really hope that I win the lottery. I really hope that I get that job. I really hope that I can buy that car. I really hope that the offer I made on that house goes through. Really, that is tying or tethering my happiness or fulfillment to some sort of outcome. However, there is another kind of hope that I think Ryan embodies, and that's why I wanted him to be here for this question, and that is a present sense of hopefulness. And it's apparent to me that letting go is sort of the antidote to hopelessness, right? It's almost the cure to hopelessness because I'm letting go of an outcome. Oh, I really hope things will be that way. And what's left there, paradoxically, is this sense of hopefulness. And so one might even say that letting go is the portal to hopefulness. What say you, Nicodemus?
Oh, man, I think what I really hear you saying is that when we are when we hold on to hope, when we have hope in our lives, the question is, how complicated is that tether to that hope? I think the great J.P. Sears would say, have your hopes all day long. List out your hopes, but don't hold on to them too tightly.
Yeah. I think that's the letting go bit there, where you're willing to let go even if you're holding on to something, right?
Yeah,
you might want the particular outcome. I put in the offer on the house, and yes, I'm hopeful that it works out, but I also recognize that if it doesn't, everything will be okay. And I think that's where that sense of hopefulness comes from. But Ryan, let's get 60 seconds on the clock for you because I'd love to talk to you because I think we all suffer from this to some extent. When we look at Finney's question and Finney's saying, there's hopelessness here because I see the state of our society and government and economy and all of these broken institutions. How can I live my life without feeling constantly disappointed by the world around me?
Finney, the world is the way you see it. I mean, what you're really asking here is, how can you see it differently? And I can think of a few things that affect my worldview. It's the people I hang out with. It's knowing what I'm capable of and willing to contribute towards in the world around me. And then lastly, it seems really trivial, but it's screen time, like both the quality and the quantity. Like, that's so important for me because it's easy for me to consume too much news media. And like when I do something like that, I start to carry a lot of worries. But I've kind of come up with a litmus test for myself. I'll ask myself this: am I in an actual emergency or am I watching someone else's? And if I'm watching someone else's and I can't contribute in a meaningful way, it's probably okay for me to turn away.
Yeah, because that sense of hopelessness is not useful in any way. It's just worrying for the sake of worry, as opposed to being concerned about something. You know what? If there's a flood in your condo right now, Ryan, Yeah, it makes sense to be concerned about it, but it does not make sense to just sit there in your chair and just ruminate about it and worry about it without doing anything. And so I love what you're saying here, because if it's an emergency or you have the ability to change something, wonderful. Well, then that sense of hopelessness will not even show up, because you know you can change something. If there's a leak if your house is flooding, you're not going to feel hopeless. You're going to feel called to action. TK, what say you?
You don't have to change the world in order to change the world. One of the unfortunate consequences of this beautifully interconnected world of real-time updates on everything by everyone is that we feel pressured to be journalists, influencers, news reporters, people that are aware of everything, commenting on everything, and doing really big things in order to create an impact in society. And the way has always been the way of localism. Ordinary individuals showing up for their lives in ordinary ways, doing the best they can to produce positive outcomes in the arena of what they can control. It's the little way of Therese Lisieux. We have no idea of how much healing we can produce just by smiling at someone and saying hello. If we showed up and did those things consistently and focused on those things, not only would we be less overwhelmed by all the big stuff that we can't control, but we would actually sow the seeds that would cause those things to begin to do better as a result of them blossoming from that little work that we do in everyday life.
Ryan, can I ask you, why do you think we tune into these things that actually increase our sense of hopelessness or worry, and they kind of make us miserable?
I think what's going on is that we love to neurose. We love to hang on to these really sharp emotions. It could be fear, sadness, anger. It could be happiness, joy. Look at that cute kitten. You should see my Instagram feed. It's like cats and memes. That's pretty much it.
Mine's mostly butts. But it makes me feel an emotion.
Oh, my stars.
That's great. Oh, man. But, that's what it is. It's like we really love to hang on to these sharp emotions, and these all these services and media outlets. I mean, they know exactly how to engage with us. And not only that, they know how to get us talking about things if they get that emotion high enough.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. What's happening in a weird way, this is like a perverse form of entertainment. I'm entertained by this because it makes me feel something. And even if it makes me feel something unpleasant or strange or upsetting, at least I'm feeling something.
Yeah, and the screen time is the low-hanging fruit. It'll always make you feel something. It's almost like either you go out, write your own story, create your own feelings, or consume someone else's story and let them create the feelings for you.
I'm beginning to wonder whether or not social media is just a net negative for the average person. And is it a net negative for me? And I don't use it in a way that I would even consider to be addicted to it. But I can see how quickly it becomes addicting. It becomes engrossing. It becomes so compelling that, oh my God, 30 minutes went by and I didn't realize I was just going through Instagram reel after Instagram reel. There are upsides to it as well. I can share really funny Ryan and I share at least one funny meme with each other every day. And quite often he'll share something that I was just getting ready to share with him. It's like the algorithm has us figured out perfectly. Yeah. However, I also have other friends that I had to unfollow or mute because they were constantly increasing their outrage and upset and expressing it. And I don't think they're wrong for doing it, but it's not something that I wanted to steep myself in. And Ryan, what I hear from you when you say the world is the way you see it, another way to interpret that is you become whatever you are steeped in. And if you're steeped in panic and chaos, and just because it masquerades as breaking news and I'm a well-informed citizen, if it's making you miserable, if it's making you anxious, if it's not productive or useful, then why am I still holding on to it? Well, Ryan, I got another question for you here in a moment. But first, real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. Ryan, we're just talking about this at the top of the show. Since today it's a brand new year. It's the first day of 2024. I was just looking in the rear view for a second. 2023 was a challenging year for us. And yet, in many ways, it was one of the best years. This podcast and the minimalists in general reached more people in 2023 than any other year, which is quite remarkable considering all the changes that happened. Our minimalism documentary got a brand new life over at YouTube and at minimalism.com, and nearly 7 million new people have seen our first film, which had 80 million plus people see it on Netflix, and it got this whole new life, and it breathed life into this minimalist movement once again. Of course, Ryan, you got the opportunity to move back to Montana. I want to talk to you about that in a bit here on the private podcast. I got some questions about your experience with your first 6 months back in Missoula, Montana. And also you launched RyanNicodemus.com, which is the hub for your monthly mentoring messages, which folks can definitely check those out. I've really been enjoying what you've been writing every month over there and seeing your growth as a writer and a thinker, and I would even say as a philosopher. And then, of course, we also launched our first ever decluttering course, Simplify Everything, which is open back up today on January 1st for 72 hours only, simplifyeverything.xyz. And the consensus is in. All of the testimonials have been outstanding, but the consensus is that Ryan Nicodemus stole the show.
Oh man, that is hilarious. I hear you, and I believe you, but I don't believe you.
Receive that compliment, because it's not me saying it. I mean,
I appreciate that, man.
I went and I watched it, and I'm like, oh, wow, Ryan, because I remember how much we were struggling filming this thing. We spent months and months filming all of these videos. And when we went through it, eventually, we got to the end of it. I started watching. I'm like, oh my gosh. All of the takes and the retakes and the practicing and the reworking and the rewriting, it all paid off with this course, which has now helped hundreds and soon to be thousands of people simplify their lives, not just with the material possessions, but the financial clutter and the calendar clutter and all of these other areas of clutter. If folks want to sign up, simplifyeverything.xyz, 72 hours only. You can find all of the student testimonials over there as well. It's time for a FAMS question, though. The Friday afternoon Minimalist Zoom, the first Friday of each month, we hang out with our Patreon subscribers. They hop on a Zoom call with us. You can turn your camera on, talk with us, or you can turn your camera off and just be a fly on the wall and witness this. We also record it for folks who can't attend the live Zoom session. But then there's this whole other world going on in the chat. Alabama's collecting your questions, comments, and smart alecky remarks over there in the chat, and she's got one from Amber today.
I had a bad car accident earlier this year, receiving a level 2 concussion and a few physical injuries. I'm seeing all the specialists, but I'm having a hard time getting out of the dark places and finding the motivation to clean and organize my house. I was a stage 1 hoarder at most prior to my accident, and now I'm on the way to becoming a stage 3 hoarder. How can I stop feeling defeated every time I turn around and see that a spot I just cleaned has more clutter on it?
Ryan, this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, where they sort of oscillate between clutter and decluttering. I found it fascinating here. There's a person with a level 2 concussion and a stage 3 hoarder, stage 1 hoarder, all of these numbers here, which can be helpful to quantify something. But what we're really trying to quantify is this emotion. I feel overwhelmed because every time I turn around, I feel like my space has been recluttered. What say you, Nicodemus?
Yeah, we really love to measure stuff, don't we? You know,
no comment.
Evans!
Oh, man.
I Dude, round up.
Why are you trying to derail me, man? You know how easy it is.
Ryan's a stage 7 hoarder, one might say.
I'm a very aggressively average hoarder. Anyway. So, you know, Mariah said something to me the other day. I was talking about, my mom was just in town for a month. It went amazing. First time ever. Well, I should say first time in a long time where I left her presence and felt like energized and empowered. It was great. But it was really hard to get into the flow of stuff. And Mariah was like, find the benevolent flow. And to me, what that means is like, what flow do I want to be in? And how flexible am I going to be with myself when I fall out of that flow? So it's not about, okay, you've got to get from a 3 to a 2 and a 2 to a 1 and a 1 to a 0.5. It's really about like, where do you want to be? And, how can you hold space for yourself to like head in that direction, but without beating yourself up too much when, it doesn't happen the way you want it to?
I think that's an interesting question. Where do you want to be? Because I don't hear that in Amber's. I hear overwhelm. I think quite often we get overwhelmed. In fact, this whole episode has been a lot about people feeling overwhelmed. Ryan, that quote that I tweet it's my own quote, my own phrase, my own minimal maxim I tweet at the beginning of each year. It's one day or day one, you decide. And Amber is now at a place where she wants to be at day one, but it feels like so overwhelmed that, one day I'll finally figure this out. Well, maybe that one day is today. And TK, I'd love to talk to you about this idea of grace around this, because I think quite often what happens is we beat ourselves up because we're not prepared or willing to give ourselves enough grace. And what I've realized is grace is measured by your ability to surrender to your imperfect past. And Amber has an imperfect past. And so does Ryan, and so do I, and so do you, and we all have an imperfect past. Although in a weird way, it is perfect because it's complete. I can't redo the past. And we try to redo or relitigate the past, and what happens? We continue to beat ourselves up in the present moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's where grace comes in.
You're absolutely right, man. I mean, where there's no room for grace, there's no room for redemption and renewal. And you guys talked about the importance of identifying where you want to be. Fundamental to that is accurately assessing where you are right now. So when you think about a map, one of the most important places on that map is the part that says you are here. And you can't generate a set of directions to where you want to be unless you're accurate and honest about where you are right now. So if you want to go to San Diego, I can't just give you directions to San Diego. I've got to know something about where you're traveling from. If you're coming from Chicago versus LA, 2 different sets of directions. And one of the things I want to suggest here, Amber, in terms of grace, is that maybe there's room to negotiate the way in which you are defining where you are right now. I would always encourage everyone to exercise a little caution with defining yourself into hoarderdom and to not be so quick to do so, because you mentioned that prior to this accident, you were a stage 1 hoarder at worst. But then after this accident, you became a stage 3 hoarder. Well, what happened there? Sure. One possibility is that after the accident, you just decided that you're just going to start compensating by buying a bunch of stuff. And even if that is the case, there's room for grace there because there are needs that exist now, wounds that exist now that need to be medicated. And this is at least an effort, even though there may be an unhealthful aspect to it. But there's another component too. Your needs are different. The person that you are now, after getting into that accident, you have different needs. And it may very well be the case that you haven't become a stage 3 hoarder, but that you are someone who has more needs than the person you used to be. And you might look like a hoarder to your previous self in the same way that you might look like you have excess to someone who doesn't have your needs. But your needs are your needs. And there's nothing hoarder-like about having to increase the amount of things that you have in order to adapt to the changing circumstances of your life. And so I would give myself the grace by saying, I am not who I used to be, and I don't need to be. It's okay for me to be honest about where I am right now and to accommodate the needs that I have at this time with the stuff that I need. Don't define that into some sort of sickness or into some sort of illness from which you need to be healed, but rather embrace that as what your life is, and that can allow you to go forward in a constructive way.
I think what you're bringing up here, TK, is that we take this word hoarding, and then it has this incredible weight with it. And I think one other way to sort of remove the weight from that is to recognize that almost everyone is a stage 1 hoarder. That's like saying you're a human being at this point. And when you live in this society, now, Human beings of the past weren't hoarders, but we have unprecedented access to material possession and consumptions and instant gratification. It's really difficult to not be a stage one hoarder. A stage one hoarder is just a person who has light clutter in 2 or more rooms. Now, when you get to a stage 3 hoarder, there's usually some light odors in rooms, or there's disordered living in some way. So that's when the clutter really tends to get in the way of living. And that's when it becomes a bit of a problem. And yes, it is, well, I'll often say, I don't want to pathologize things, but yes, hoarding can be pathological, and it is a problem. When we had Kelly Starrett on the podcast, and he and his wife Juliet, they talked about how pain is a request for change. And Amber, you're experiencing some pain right now around your stuff. And whether you're a hoarder or not a hoarder, it doesn't matter. What really matters here is the amount of pain that you are experiencing. And one way to ease up on that is to give yourself some grace as you move forward. Ryan, you got anything else to add to that?
No, I think she's got plenty of perspectives to consider, and yeah, best of luck to you.
I'd love to keep you around for a few more discussion points here, but first, Alabama, awesome. What do you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
This is Peggy from Georgia. When I decluttered years ago, I listened to the wisdom from folks like Josh and Ryan and Joshua Becker via their audiobooks, while I systematically tackled all of the spaces in my oversized house. Their stories kept me inspired and encouraged. It was a long slog, but I did it. Hope this helps someone.
All right, y'all, we'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour Maximal edition of episode 424, which includes answers to a bunch more questions and several simple living segments. Visit patreon.com/theminimalist or click the link in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also gain access to all of our podcast archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trials, so if you'd like to test drive our private podcast, you can join for 7 days for free. And that is our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little